there is no sacred cows in marketing.
Nope.
Everything should be slaughtered.
Too many times people personify an imaginary person and give them power that they then want to control.
When you end up in these boxes, all you've really done is minimize your profits.
There's a lot of different motivators you can use to speak to more people and also can persuade them in a positive way.
I use the same theory dealing with the employees.
Welcome to Marketing from the Edge podcast. I'm Cody Alexander. I've directly generated over $200 million in net revenue over the last 5 years through innovative marketing and a numbers-first strategy. Joined with me is my dad. John Alexander has become the go-to expert in the direct marketing field, generating over $1.5 billion in revenue over the last 5 years. Sought by both board of directors and nine-figure businesses, he is an owner/founder of Centurion Publishing and is on the journey of growing this brand new business from 0 to 100 million in annual revenue. Today, we're going to talk about one of our most controversial opinions about business and marketing. How you view your customer decides what you do across almost every other part of your business. We'll cover why it's dangerous to have imaginary bobs, the sacred truth that must be destroyed, and what to do instead if you want to unlock massive growth and treat your customers right. We expect this one will get a lot of controversial feedback. Today, we're going to talk about probably one of the most controversial beliefs we have in marketing. I know for me personally, it's probably pissed off more marketers and got a lot of people butthurt, but I think it's because it's one of the most valuable parts of the business, right? It's about your customers.
Yeah.
And anytime you have a belief about customers, people have probably a stronger belief than you do.
Well, especially when there's a lot of beliefs that are tied. Like somebody told somebody something who told somebody something who read something somewhere and they're like, oh, well, this is just the way it is.
Right.
And to me, like there is no sacred cows in marketing.
Nope.
Everything should be slaughtered. Everything should be looked at and evaluated from the basis of the customer and the time period that we're in. We're in a year now that what I did 4 or 5 years ago, I never do today.
Absolutely. And I think I'm just going to get it over with. So, if you have young children listening, beware. The following words might offend you. Because there is no such thing as a customer avatar. At least I believe that the more you make customer, quote, avatars, the less likely you are to grow as a company. I call it imaginary bobs. A lot of companies have imaginary bobs. Whether they're business owners or marketers or at any level of the company, people feel like they know Bob. But the only problem is Bob's not real.
Bob's not real?
Bob's not real. Like I said, if you have kids listening, I hope I didn't offend anybody. But here's what it comes down to, right? Is that when you think you know your customer better than the customer, you're going to ultimately make bad decisions.
Yeah, and I think the idea and premise behind an avatar is good, meaning you're not your customer, right? That was the whole point of that.
Right.
Was like, hey, you're not writing to you. You're not your customer, right? Try to identify with them. If you're a married dude, 50, and you're writing to dating 20-year-olds, yeah, you're not writing to you, right? You're writing to them. But the problem is people take that too far and they're like, okay, well, this is the only person this appeals and applies to. And you end up limiting what you're accomplishing in the world. In any business, you have character traits that exist within your business by and far, but not to like, hey, we might primarily cater to male, but maybe it's 70-30. So you don't write to females at all?
Well, I think you touched on a point. I believe in two things, right? One, you're solving a problem and you have an approach to solve that problem, right? And so you may be writing to a problem people are facing or a pain point or whatever you want to call it, right? And then you use motivators to get them to take action on the pain, problem, opportunity. Are they coming from a place of fear, right? Are they coming from a place of scarcity? Are they coming from a place of greed, pride, ego, whatever,
Exactly.
right? Like you're trying to tap into a problem and a motivator, right? You're trying to get someone to take action. The problem happens is I've heard more small businesses say this. And someone's like, well, who's your demographic? And they don't just say, males 30 plus with this problem, and they're more likely to XYZ, right? What they say is our demographic is, and they'll name this guy. I've heard people, they name him, call him Joe, Bob, Bill, whatever, right? And that's why I joke imaginary Bob. And he's a 53-year-old white man with grandkids, and he lives in a small town, and he believes in whatever, and he likes long or short walks on the beach, and his favorite flavor of beer is whatever. You're like, okay, that's not a demographic, right? You're describing a person, and if you're writing a message, you have to write to your demographic. But too often I've heard like, well, write to X, name your demographic. The problem is that, again, when you write to one problem, you exclude anyone else.
Primarily in financial marketing, right? You write to the masses, you don't write to individuals.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why we use a lot of newsletters, because you can't give personalized advice. Like that's part of the whole premise. But I do know a guy who writes very effective e-letter that's written very specifically to a problem or I'll say to a person, but he's not writing to a person. He's writing to an issue, right? He makes it very specific, right? It feels personal, but I guarantee you he's not like, I'm only writing to 50-year-old white males that have 3 kids that do that. Like he's going, I'm writing to this type of person that has this issue and wants this solution.
Right.
And that's who he's writing to, right? Not necessarily to imaginary Bob.
And here's why I believe it's so detrimental, right? Is when you personify this, quote, avatar as a human being, people get attached and they make personal or emotional decisions around imaginary Bob, right? And like someone will read something and they'll be, whoa, you can't talk to imaginary Bob that way. You're
like he's imaginary.
I'm talking to the wall here.
It's like I was talking to somebody the other day. We were talking about dream, and they're like, why do we put so much limitations around dreams? Like, if I want to fly, why don't I just fly? Right? Like, it's imaginary.
The laws of gravity cannot contain me here.
Exactly.
You said this earlier, and I think it's a great description of it, is that people put their customers on a pedestal, but at the same time, they chain them.
Yeah.
Right. And
exactly.
So they want to be in control of Bob.
Yeah.
Right.
Bob needs to think like this, act like this, do this. And this is what Bob needs to do before I sell to Bob. Right.
That's it. I'll just let you say it because I think it was perfectly worded, because it really was like, I could put a little catchphrase to this.
Well, here's my belief is that ultimately you throw all that shit out the window, because it really doesn't matter whether you believe in Avatar or doesn't believe, or whatever. Right. The reality is that if you focus and allow the customer to be in control of their process, right? Customer in control, right? I'm not saying the customer is always right. Don't get me wrong, right? Because I don't think the customer is always right. But you put the customer in the control so that they can go through the process the way the customer wants to go through the process, not the way you want imaginary Bob to go through the process. You make a hell of a lot more money, right? And I said the word customer on purpose, right? It's the guy with a credit card. It's not the focus group that's got 32 opinions. It's not your marketer that thinks you should do everything on Twitter now. Like, let the customer be in control of their experience going through your business.
Yep. And here's the other part of it too, is people will either let Google or Facebook tell them what their customer is.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, we can only sell to people that are 40 years or older. You want to be as efficient with your dollars as possible. Don't get me wrong. But my point is that when you try to control your customer, ultimately you drive more people away than you attract.
So let me use a perfect example of that. I think that allows to the same point on why avatars, I think, were a bigger deal in the past and not now, right? And this whole idea of customer and control. Let's use something simple that a lot of people have a feeling around, or at least some experience around. Let's just use, the product launch formula, right? Like came out in the early 2000s. Jeff Walker did a great job on it, worked outstanding, right? Worked really well. And the concept is you basically take the sales letter, turn it sideways, you release a video each day, you force them through the series of videos. They're a much better customer on the other end. They buy, all that idea, right?
Right.
And got to remember, all this shit was pre-Netflix, right? Was back when you waited till Thursday night at 7:00 to watch your show.
So before you had the scrolling on Instagram
exactly,
and all that.
Before YouTube and what's next and all the other things, right? Like, and the concept was, like, make the customer so wound up, he's so excited to buy at the end. And it works, right? Don't get me wrong. It still works today. But if you flip that around and you put the customer in control, right? You jump on Netflix and you want to watch 7 episodes of something. Some people want to watch 2 episodes.
Yeah.
Some people want to watch 10. Some people want to start on Friday and not turn off it until Sunday. Like everybody's got a different experience, but they're all trying to accomplish the same feeling, which is whatever the feeling gives you watching videos on Netflix.
Yeah.
So if you put the customer in control, say in the product launch formula, they consume video 1, you're like, hey, here's video 2. Oh, wait. Jeff says that comes out tomorrow. Well, why? Why don't you just let it be today? Like the guy's right there. He's ready to go. He wants to watch all 3 friggin' videos. And I guarantee you, here's what I know from a shitload of webinars. And I say a shitload, better than 100 over the last few years, selling $1.5 billion worth of shit, is that I use the word shit in meaning stuff, guys, like not crap, not literal shit. But, ultimately what it really came down to is it really didn't matter if the customer watched all those videos or just showed up on the webinar. We had the same conversion rate, right? Maybe the marketing wasn't the best, right? Maybe the copy wasn't the best, whatever, right? There might've been a bunch of reasons, but the point being is that it's just not like you deciding that the customer has to do step 1, step 2, and step 3 before they get the choice of step 4. And if they don't do 1, 2, and 3, they're a bad buyer is a load of shit. I mean, it's flat out false.
Yeah. Like if you go back to sales theory, right? What's the best way you get someone to show up for a phone call? You let them pick the day and time that works best for them.
Yep.
Because here's the fact is, if you pick what works best for them, 1, they're more likely to show up. 2, they're more likely to pay attention. And 3, they're less likely to be irritated, pissed off, whatever, right? Like they don't have kids screaming in the background or the wife's not mad because they had to jump on a call, right? Like it's a time that they can carve out and set aside. It's the same premise. How do you get someone to take action? You let them pick when is best for them.
I use the same theory dealing with the employees, right? Like, believe it or not, everybody's like, oh, you got to be ruthless. You got to be like this. You got to be like that. I'm like, why don't you sit down with your employee, right? All we want to do is take the mountain. There's 75 freaking ways to take the mountain. And so I can give you the exact way I want you to take the mountain and you'll follow it, right? Because you're an employee, right? Your job is to take the mountain. Or if I sit down with you and I'm like, hey, in my experience, here's the best way to do it, but you choose what you want to do. All I want is us to take the mountain. The path that they've self-chosen for themselves, even if it's your path, they're much more passionate, they're much more committed, they're much more driven, and they're much more likely to do it than to just rope in. They're much more satisfied in doing it. All those things, rather than being like, hey, this is the only path to get to the mountain. Because the reality is almost anything in business, there's not one path to do anything.
Exactly. And going back to it, your customer is a human being. It is not a robot. It doesn't think like if you're like, well, they'll do 1, 2, 3, 4. This customer's not thinking, all right, I need to do step 1, 2, 3, 4. They're thinking, I have pain. It is immediate and it is urgent and I need a solution, right? And whether it's pain, opportunity, whatever it is. Again, pain, problem, opportunity. But the point being is that they're in an emotional state, not a logical state. And too many people treat their customers as if they're behaving in logical ways. Your customer is dynamic, just like you're talking about taking the mountain, right? By opening up the opportunity allows your employees to be dynamic to the situation. So that way, when they have to do a course correction, they're not like, whoa, that wasn't in the plan, right? They're like, okay, here's how we'll accommodate that, right? If you are dynamic with your customer is more likely to get to the outcome you want them to. You want to give your customers the most opportunities to say yes possible.
Yep.
Because if you wait for them to tell you no, they're not in a logical state. They're not like, no, that doesn't work because X, Y, Z. Yeah. So here's that, right? Not so much.
I just want to add on to that because I think this is something that when I first started doing this, I got a ton of pushback, especially from copywriters, is that we would hold a webinar. I mean, we did them every week.
Right.
And the webinar would pop up. And I knew for a fact that for our customer and our demographic, if you think about that, not an avatar, but here's the components. They're older, all those things, right? If we started at 8 o'clock, I needed the button to pop before 9 o'clock.
Yeah.
And so now it has to be logical. You can't just have the button pop up in the middle of a sentence. And I say the button pop, meaning the ability for them to order, right?
Right.
The ability to click on a button, the call to action, right? The ability to click on a button and go to an order form. Not necessarily the call to action part of the copy in the pitch, but I needed the button to pop. And I'd have guys that are like, well, I want to do this at 90 minutes. I want to do it at 95. I'm like, yeah, great. 2/3 of the customers are going to be gone because they are, right? I can watch it on a chart. And so what people lose sight of is they're like, well, the button's got to pop at minute 59. I'm like, no, it still has to be logical, guys. The concept isn't the button popping. The concept is the ability to find a point in the sales message or adjust your sales message to make a logical point. But guys be like, well, I haven't got the pitch out yet. So they haven't listened to my 10 minutes of why they should order.
Yeah, value stacking.
Yeah,
whatever.
so all the other stuff. Like they're like, yeah, I got to do all this stuff. I need all these things to occur before I give them bill to order. And I'm like, you're full of shit, right? Like if they listen for 45 or 50 minutes, you say you need another 7 minutes or 10 minutes or 20 minutes of their time to stack something else up before they're going to buy. I'm like, why don't we just pop the button at the beginning of this thing? And they swore up and down it would never work. Never worked. They're like, well, you haven't even told them the price yet. Well, yeah, they can get it when they click the button and go read the thing, right? Like if they've listened for that long. So again, it's just allowing the customer to do their thing. And we found that if I could get that button to pop between 55 and 65 minutes, somewhere in here, we need to find a logical spot for a value proposition to have occurred, for the ability for a customer to order. And then you can still go through your pitch. That we found when we did that, all of a sudden sales went up. Well, yeah, no shit. Like I just had more customers to pitch.
Yeah.
I could have actually gotten a lower conversion rate, but I had more bodies.
Right.
Because it just came down to that.
You need to be mindful of the realities of your business.
Exactly.
Right? But at the end of the day, too many times people personify an imaginary person and give them power that they then want to control. Too many people are walking around with pain, problem, opportunity, whatever, that you could help for you to selfishly decide things for that customer.
Yeah.
And that's really what it comes down to is it's selfish, or it's like a need of control. Like they can only do these things if they do it exactly the way I believe. Your customer is an intelligent adult and they will make a decision, whether it's the one you want them to make or not. And they're making decisions outside of your quote perfect funnel or flow or journey or whatever that you're not accounting for or accommodating. And you're doing a disservice to your customer by not treating them like an intelligent adult that is dynamic and that really, at the end of the day, they just need a solution. They need help. And you can help them unless you're a scammer. And if that case, please stop listening to the podcast. We don't like scammers. But, if you have a real product that has real solutions, your primary objective is to help as many people as possible while also staying profitable so that way you don't go broke.
Well, when you end up in these boxes, all you've really done is minimize your profits. Like that's literally what you've done, which too many companies out there, and they hate it when I say this, but too many companies, I'm like, yeah, by choosing to do this instead of that, all you've chosen is to minimize your profits. And they're like, well, no, I want to do this and that. I'm like, no, you haven't. The job of the CMO is to maximize the revenue, create a world-class customer experience and maximize the revenue. That's what you're trying to accomplish. Most people out there are minimizing their profits. I firmly believe this.
You're absolutely right. If you want to make the best experience for your customer, if you want to treat them like an adult that's intelligent and that's dynamic, what you need to do is you need your content, you need your journeys, you need like the way you market to them to be dynamic. You cannot walk everyone down a single file line and expect them to stay there.
Yeah.
You have got to treat these people gently, right? You have to recognize that they are in an emotional state and do the right things to walk them down a path that's likely to get them the outcome you want.
Especially if you're in business, like you said, and you don't believe that you've got the best possible product, then improve your friggin' product or go out of business.
Yeah.
Plain and simple. But if you 100% believe that they're better off with your product or your service than somebody else's, then you owe it to them to do the best job possible that you can in order to maximize the number of people that get exposed to your product. Plain and simple.
100%.
And so if that's the route you're going down, then throw out all this bullshit, right? Stop listening to all this horse shit, right? Like figure out what a customer, again, not a name on an email list, but a guy with a credit card that's willing to give you money, figure out what they're actually after, and then try to provide that in the mass. As opposed to you're like, okay, I need 10 more guys like this guy. No, what you really need is this guy had this problem and these things. Why don't you figure out where another group of people that have those same problems are, regardless of what their demographics are.
Or what another motivator is.
Yeah.
Like if you're,
oh yeah, that's another great point.
Yeah. If you're like, hey, I sent an email about why if you don't have this thing, this will happen to you. It's like, great. What's the greed side of that? Like, what do people want out of this, right? Hey, if you take this, here's what you will get, right? You have to be able to approach motivators to get people excited, because some people are naturally fear-driven or pessimistic. Some people are greed-driven. They're optimistic, right? Some people are realistic, right? And so they might believe in like scarcity or some middle ground of fear and greed. Like there's a lot of different motivators you can use to speak to more people, and also can persuade them in a positive way that you can help them. Because if all anyone ever hears is, hey, if you don't do this, you're going to fall off the deck, and someone's an optimist, they're going to go, no, I'll be fine.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And then they fall off the deck. Well, you didn't help that person very well, did you?
Nope, not at all.
So at the end of the day, I really just want to harp on, let go of your imaginary Bob, let him fade into the darkness, and start treating your customers like intelligent adults, because your customer's not an avatar. They're a person with a problem looking for a solution.
Absolutely. Well said.
Well, I think if you haven't been convinced now, I don't know if we can convince you, but at least try it. At least try it. Try a series of emails or sends or phone calls or whatever.
Test it is what you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and if you do it and it doesn't work for you, you're right. I'm full of shit. But you might be surprised. And if it does work for you, you might accidentally make a lot more money. And if that doesn't excite and motivate you, like that's what gets me going every day. So we'll see you next week.
Later.
You've been listening to Marketing from the Edge podcast. If you want to hear more of our thoughts every week, visit marketingedgepod.com. We'll share more of our very best lessons, thoughts, strategies for growing a business, as well as some personal stories here from the edge of the world. Invest a couple minutes of your morning and we'll give you the blueprint to growing your business from where it's at today to where you want it to be. That's marketingedgepod.com. If you want to reach out to us directly, feel free to email Cody at marketingedgepod.com and you might get a surprise bonus.